Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank you all for coming here. Those who came in person, those who are watching us online, welcome as well. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be able to come here and present on these important topics regarding Spiritism. And today we're going to be talking about Evolving Earth. It's the title, but the content is regarding planetary transition. Such an important and concept and content, I guess, that applies very well, as David said in the beginning, regarding all these trials and tribulations, everything that we're going through as a society, as human beings in an earth that is constantly evolving. So what is our role in this world, and how does this planetary transition actually work? And I'd like to start today by saying this passage from John chapter 14, where he says, where Jesus said, "In my Father's house are many mansions," and this is one of the translations. There's some Bible translations that say, my Father's house are many rooms, but the idea, the concept is the same. And when we go to understanding a little bit more, we go to the Gospel according to Spiritism to try to understand what are these rooms, what are these many mansions that Jesus perhaps is talking about. The Gospel according to Spiritism is going to say that the house of the Father is the universe. The universe, which is something that we have no idea how big and how complex it is. We have no idea of all of that still. We're still evolving to get there, to get that notion right, but we have no idea yet. But the Father's house is the universe. And the different mansions, the Gospel is going to say, are the worlds which circulate in infinite space and offer the spirits to incarnate on them, dwelling places which correspond to their progress. So places of which they can inhabit and progress according to their needs, to progress with the worlds and on those worlds according to their needs. And even though we're here incarnate, this is probably done so we can understand, because there is a point in our evolution, as a spiritual evolution, that we don't need to become a body of flesh and bone and blood anymore. We don't need to incarnate anymore. So the idea here is that these worlds, these many rooms or many houses, are there, or many mansions, are there to help us progress, to help us in our path to spiritual depuration, to help us grow and evolve. And it says here, the conditions of the various worlds, they differ from one another with respect to the degree of elevation or inferiority of their inhabitants. So I'm going to show in a little bit the categories of these worlds that we learn through the Gospel according to Spiritism. But the idea is that the condition of these worlds, let's say the terrain in which these plants, if we think of our souls as plants, are going to develop and are going to grow and sprout, varies. Based on what? Based on the condition of the spirits and what they need from that world and what they can contribute to that world. There are some, it says here, they're inferior to earth, and some that are better, let's call it, than earth. In the inferior worlds, existence is all material. Passions are sovereign and morality is almost nil. So the material aspect is still very, very strong compared to the moral aspect. These are the worlds in which let's say they're inferior to earth still, the primitive worlds, as we'll see. But in those worlds, the material aspect exerts a power too strong in the spirit, because the spirit is still developing. So in these worlds, it says here, the passions are sovereign, meaning they command, they govern behavior, and morality is almost nil. There's almost no morality. At the same time, as the soul is progressing, the material influences, this power that the material has over the spirit, diminishes to such an extent that in the elevated worlds, life is, by way of saying, all spiritual. Look how interesting that is. Life is all spiritual. We are far from that world yet, but there are these worlds in which life is all spiritual. There's no need for the matter, and the matter are matters that we don't even know. that we haven't even discovered. Don't have that knowledge yet. As such, inhabitants of a planet like Earth accompany its progress through a process of spiritual symbiosis. And I was trying to find a way to describe this, and I put spiritual symbiosis here, because in the idea that if we think about symbiosis, the biological process of symbiosis is what? Is the interaction between two organisms in which there is an advantage to both in that interaction. So we are here on Earth accompanying its evolution. We're also part of that evolution. And as we saw in the message in the beginning, that I don't think it's never by chance, the last sentence there said, we can be builders of this world. Builders of this world. We can also progress with the world, as the world is progressing, as we are progressing as well. And there's the symbiosis, meaning there's benefit in progressing ourselves, in helping progress our world. And there's this cycle, the symbiotic cycle, in which we progress in the world as well. Progress is a law of nature. We learned that in the Gospel according to Spiritism, chapter 3. It says here that all beings of creation, be they animated or not, have been submitted to this law through the bounty of God, who wishes everything to be exalted and to prosper. At the same time as living beings progress morally, so the worlds in which they live progress materially. Because again, we still live in a material world, and those worlds, the type of worlds such as Earth, are progressing materially as well as we progress morally as spirits, as we are again builders of this world, this better world. Interestingly, there are categories in the Gospel according to Spiritism, and they go in an ascending order of progress, or moral progress perhaps, spiritual progress as well. And I put categories in quotation marks there because even they say, when they're talking about, anytime that they ask the spirits about categories, they're a little cautious in giving categories and giving certain stages, because there's a very tenuous line. It's very a fuzzy boundary there between these categories. But to satiate perhaps the curiosity, they would say, okay, so you want categories? There's 3 orders of spirits, there are 5 orders of planets, and so forth and so on. So they say that by virtue of the state in which these planets, these worlds, these many houses of the Father are, they divide it into categories. The first one is primitive worlds. And this is just a demonstration. This is not an actual primitive world. But I wanted to have a visual component to that. So in these primitive worlds, which the Earth was at one point a primitive world, these are destined to receive the initial incarnations of human soul. That's the definition according to the Gospel, according to Spiritism. They are destined to receive the initial incarnations of the human soul. After that, there's one that we do know, the world of tests and atonements, of trials and expiations, the earth. The one that we're in, and in this world, atonements occur, and they say it's where evil predominates. Where, again, there is, if we think of a ratio of the material forces and the spiritual forces, there's still way more material forces in place versus the spiritual forces, but it's starting to shift. Before that was mainly material, not much moral or spiritual, and then it starts to shift now with the tests and atonements. After that, we have regenerating worlds of regeneration, as we learn, and they say that in these worlds is where souls who still have to atone, may absorb new strength by resting from the fatigue of fighting. This is the definition that they give. They still may have to atone, but they will find some, they're going to absorb new strength from resting from the fatigue of the fighting, because the world of tests and atonements is one that's not easy. It's not an easy one to progress, but it's part of the progress as well. But once this world becomes a regenerating world, or a world of regeneration, as some literature mentions, these souls that now inhabit that world can find some respite, and they can find some time to restore their strength so they can continue in the progression. After that, we have the blessed worlds. And they say that in this one is where goodness outweighs evil. Where goodness outweighs evil, meaning there's more goodness than evil. In other words, we're far from that as an earth, as a society. But in these blessed worlds, as they say, is where goodness outweighs evil. So if we think about the material forces and the spiritual and the moral forces, we start to see the shift in the balance in which now the spirit is becoming stronger, more involved. There's less of a degree of a material influence, a material control over the spirit's the spirit's actions. And then we have the divine worlds. This is the one that says inhabited by purified spirits, where only goodness exists. So purified spirits, where only goodness exists. And in these worlds that we have no idea, our minds can't even comprehend what they are. But this is what they're telling us, that in these divine worlds, this final category perhaps of worlds, goodness prevails over everything else. Well, so the earth's condition then, if we go to the gospel according to Spiritism, we're going to see that they say this. Many are surprised that on earth there is so much badness, so many crude passions, so many miseries in every kind of sickness. From this, they conclude the human species is a very miserable one. This judgment comes from a very narrow point of view of those who emit it, which gives a false idea of the whole. We must consider, however, that in actual fact, the entirety of humanity is not all on earth, but only a small fraction of the total. Let's dismember this paragraph a little bit. They say here that a lot of people are still very much surprised to see so much badness, every type of sickness still on earth. But if we think about our planet and the progress that it's making in this whole progression of this planetary progression, we can see that there is still tests and atonements. It's not going to be an easy ride. It's not a summer camp. Earth is not a summer camp. So the idea here is they say that people with this narrow point of view, this narrow analysis, because of course we are still evolving, our eyes can only see so far. So with that view, we may say, and we look at the present and we can think, okay, maybe that's it. This is very bad. What are we doing? We're retroceding. We're not progressing. Actually going backward. We're not going forward. But the idea here they're saying is that we must consider that in actual fact, and this blew my mind first time I read this, the entirety of humanity is not all on earth, but only a fraction. So here we are still with our narrow point of view, trying to find aliens and whatnot, and without understanding a tiny grain of sand in the entire sea of the universe. And they're saying here that the humanity, and the idea here of humanity is this level of progress of the human soul. They're saying it's not all on earth. It's spread in other worlds through the cosmos, through the universe. And that's very interesting. Because now there's so many different worlds that we have no idea. And there are spirits that are going through tests and atonements such as we are going through here on earth. And there's two analogies, there's three actually, but I'll give you two for now. That they say earth is like a hospital or like a prison, So they say that Manuel Filomeno de Miranda, which is a spiritual benefactor of Divaldo, and Divaldo has psychograph books by him. And he talks a lot about planetary transition. He says that the earth is still the teaching hospital for souls in search of real health and knowledge of the divine laws. So he's making the analogy of earth being as a hospital. Some say prison too, and if we go to the gospel according to Spiritism, to just give us some context, they say that in the same way that the total population of a city is not to be found in hospitals and prisons, we do not find the total population of humanity here on earth. And then they continue, they say, just as the sick leaves the hospital, and those who leave prison once they're done with their term, when man is cured of all his moral infirmities, he will also leave the earth environment to go to happier worlds. So again, the same narrow view. If we had somebody come, they don't know earth, and they're saying, okay, I want to see what humanity is all about, and you put them in a hospital that they only see suffering. Or you throw them in a prison, they say, okay, So humanity is only this. It's only suffering, it's only evil, that's it. No, it's not. So it's a narrow view to think that that's what it is. So when we look at humanity in the stage that we are, if we think of the stage of the earth and the stage of us as spirits inhabiting the earth, we would have a very limited view if we think that this is all there is. And they're saying, no, there's more. They mention again the hospital, a prison, and earth. And this is still in the gospel according to Spiritism. They say that the entire of humanity is not all on earth, but only a small fraction of the total. In effect, in my Father's house, so they're quoting Jesus, the passage from the Bible, John chapter 14. Human species covers all those endowed with reason who inhabit the innumerable orbs of the universe. Endowed with reason that inhabit the innumerable, this is interesting too, orbits of the universe. We have no idea how big the universe is, how diverse, how complex. And they're coming to us and saying, take it easy. You guys are gonna get there, but this is gonna take a long time, and this is what you have, so don't have that limited view. And in terms of analogy, I think when we're talking about planetary transition, which is a topic covered in a lot of Spiritist lectures and Spiritist centers, and I always try to think of analogies, and I think analogies help understand a little bit of this process of the planetary transition. So the one that I brought was of a school. So we have the hospital, we have the prison, but the metaphor I'm going to use and I want to use is the school. Because if we think about a school, the physical school, and we make the parallel with the physical earth as well, the physical planet that we inhabit, there are these grades. So let's imagine, in the United States, we have this educational system where you have elementary school, middle school, high school, and after that you can go, college, master's, doctorate degree, etc. You can do things after high school. So the idea that I want to bring for us to visualize perhaps is, let's say Earth is middle school right now. So Earth, we have 5th grade and in 8th grade. So let's say Earth is a middle school, just middle school. What happens then is you have in the middle school 5th graders, 6th graders, 7th, 8th graders. They all vary in terms of knowledge, of maturity, of intellect, emotional development. They all vary. They're all bunched up in something called middle school, but they all vary. So what happens then when planets transition? And I like to, again, use the school because I visualize it better like this. What happens when these planets transition, and if we think of primitive worlds as elementary, tests and atonements as middle school, high school, let's say, is a regenerating world, Earth is becoming a high school now. So when that happens, when we have a world of regeneration, Earth is going to become a high school. So what happens in high school then? You have 9th grade, 10th, 11th, 12th. So people who transition, who goes through the grades, same way that we go through school, 5th grade, 6th, 7th, 8th, and then we're in high school because we're getting the necessary progress, the academic achievements we need to get as far as grades and everything else. We're progressing. We go then to a high school once we finish 8th grade, but only if we pass 8th grade. What happens if we don't pass 8th grade? We have to repeat it. In a very basic metaphor, we have to repeat 8th grade. But here's the issue. The school that you've been in through 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade now doesn't support middle school anymore. Now that physical school is only high school. So what happened with those who, because they couldn't progress through 8th grade, because they weren't interested in study, so they failed 8th grade or rebelled against teachers, whatever that may be, what happened to those 8th graders that couldn't progress? And now their school, their physical school, is a high school now. They have to go to a different school. They have to repeat 8th grade, but the problem is now that school, there's no more 8th grade. It's only 9th grade and onward. So they have to go to a different school. So this idea then is that when these spirits don't progress along with the planet and the planet changes their category per se, they have to be displaced somewhere else to continue their progress. They have to complete 8th grade because everybody, completes school in theory. So they have to go through those stages, show their progress in 8th grade so they can go to high school. But now their school, their Earth, their planet doesn't support 8th grade anymore. So they go to somewhere else. and we'll see what happened with people from Capella. The other book that's really good about this topic is On the Way to the Light, psychographed by our dear Chico, dictated by Emmanuel. It's a book from 1938, and he says some things that are very much applicable almost 100 years later. He says, we watch as souls change their garments of flesh over the incessant course of the centuries. The early organizations of humankind pass away, as do its great cities, transformed into silent boneyards. I think this sentence is so strong. Everything passes. Things go back to dust. If we think of all those great empires, all those great civilizations that they thought they were invincible, immortal even, they all are now what? Silent boneyards. And I thought this was like such an impactful one. And he says, now one can see the unbreakable thread that runs through the centuries of earthly experiences, harmoniously linking one to the other so that they may be immortal, the immortal treasure of the human soul on its glorious ascent towards the infinite. So the linking of these experiences, meaning everything that we do as spirits in our incarnation, when we're in the spiritual plane, everything, all this progress is linked together. It stays with us. The good and the bad stays with us. And we carry that forward, it says, towards the human soul in its glorious ascent, because we're all divine beings made to progress, made to become closer to God, toward the infinite. And he uses the infinite with capital I there. In terms of this mutual progress, if we go to the Gospel according to Spiritism, we find this passage that says, spirits who find themselves incarnated in any world are not bound to that same world indefinitely, nor do they go through all the phases of progress needed to achieve perfection in that one world. They're not bound indefinitely, meaning with no end to that world. The same way that, again, high school, if we think of the middle school, those who pass through the middle school, if you have to go to a different school for high school because your school doesn't have high school, you go to a different school. You're not bound to that school indefinitely. You're not meant to reach 8th grade and stay there and never progress anymore. And it's just as spirits, we're not bound to a specific world forever. We advance, and as we advance, the world advances as well, and then we continue progressing. When they reach the maximum degree of the spirits, reach the maximum degree of advancement their world has to offer, they then pass on to a more elevated one, and so on, successively, until they reach the state of purified spirits, and then we have the divine world as we learn. Same way when high school is done, for those who did college or want to go to college, they're going to go somewhere else to do college because they reached their level of 12th grade of knowledge that they needed to achieve and that they wanted to achieve. So they graduated, so now they move on. The same way here, because we are in the right place at the right time for our progress and the world's progress. So the idea is we absorb this knowledge, we put that knowledge into practice, we evolve as the worlds are evolving, as our world is evolving. So they even mention that these worlds are these different stations. That's the word that they use in the Gospel according to Spiritism. These different stations that the spirits find the elements that they need to progress in accordance to their degree of perfection. Progress with accordance to their degree of perfection. And then they also mention that it is a recompense. So it's something that they seek, and it's good for the spirit once they're ascend to a world of higher elevation, just as it's a punishment to go to a world that is less advanced than theirs. So the Capella, which is in the Auriga constellation, is often mentioned again in these lectures about this topic. And in the book On the Way to the Light by Emmanuel, we have that many thousands of years ago, one of Capella's planets, which resembled Earth in many ways, reached the culmination of one of its extraordinary evolutionary cycles. So it reached its peak, its culmination. It changed category per se. And what happened to those spirits that couldn't evolve with the world, that couldn't contribute anymore, that couldn't advance? What happened to them? They had to go somewhere else. And just for curiosity's sake, Capella, light from there takes 42 years to reach Earth. Light travels at 300,000 kilometers per second. It takes 42 years. So that is for us to have a faint idea of how far that planet is and how far these spirits had to travel to get to here to continue their advancement. The great spirit communities, again, still on the way to the light. The great spirit communities, director of the cosmos, thus decided to send those crime-hardened spirits here to faraway Earth, where they would learn to accomplish great conquests of the soul through pain and the hard work of its environment, so that's the first aspect, while at the same time, here's the second, giving impetus to the progress of their less evolved brothers and sisters, because in the eyes of God, we're all spirits, we're all brothers and sisters. So there's two aspects here. One, they had to come here to continue their advancement, and they say these crime-hardened spirits, those spirits that were in that planet that did not pass 8th grade, so now they need to go somewhere else. And they come to Earth, which is a middle school with 5th and 6th graders, and they're like, oh my God, what is this? I know so much more than these guys. These guys are all like primitives and brutes and all of that. But of course, because it's middle school. So their aspect is one, them going through these trials and expiations to live on this planet that resemble theirs very much. And the second is they have now, these spirits that came here had now the mission to advance their brothers and sisters, to give the impetus to the progress of those. So like if we think of the 8th graders teaching the 5th and 6th and 7th graders about academic things. Thus, it was that Jesus received that horde of suffering and unhappy beings into the light of his kingdom of love and justice. So that's when Jesus as the governor of our planet here, received the horde of those spirits from Capella, from one of the planets on Capella. And if we can only imagine, and they even mentioned this a little bit in the book, of how much they probably suffered being now in a world that was very much in the stage that the world was in, very much different than the world that they had, because their world had already advanced. So can you imagine them being now in this society, in this place where everyone else was basically less evolved than they were, and the planet and all those things, how hard it must be. And I can only imagine like the pain of those loved ones that evolved and they couldn't evolve, so they had to be separated so they can continue with their progress. The pain these spirits must have felt. Shifting a little bit of authors here, we're going to talk about Divaldo. Divaldo psychographed 2 books, both by the same spirit, Manuel Filomeno de Miranda, and we have them both in English. One is called Planetary Transition. The other one is On the Way to a World of Regeneration. And I have a little excerpt here from one of them, from On the Way to World of Regeneration. And it says, on Earth, we are experiencing a moment of great transition from a world of tests and atonements to a world of regeneration. The changes observed are of moral nature, inviting human beings to change their behavior for the better, changing vicious habits so that the paradigms of justice, duty, and order and love are installed. So it says here, this moment of great transition into the category of the planets, in the category of the worlds from tests and atonements to a world of regeneration. And inviting us, human beings alive right now, and those discarnate spirits listening to us who are also here on earth, to change their behaviors for the better, changing those habits that keep us in the rear, that keep us away from progressing, So that the paradigms of justice, duty, order, and love. Justice, duty, order, and love. Which we think about it are still far from being fully achieved by everyone. But that's what we must strive for. As spirits living in this planet, in this moment in time. The great number, going back to the gospel, the great number of superior intelligences amongst your inhabitants, this is what the spirits are saying, indicates that the earth is not a primitive world destined to receive beings who have recently left the hands of the Creator, or left the hand of the Creator. So they're saying, for those who say there's only disgrace, there's terrible people killing people, all these atrocities that we see, our world is definitely, it's the primitive world for sure. They're saying, not necessarily, the great number of superior intelligences amongst your inhabitants already indicates that it's not a primitive world. The same way, imagine if we were transported to, this is another analogy I was thinking while I was doing this lecture, preparing this lecture. If we were transported to live all of a sudden with a tribe of cannibals, we would look at their behavior and think, no, what are you guys doing? This is terrible, no. And see all the aggression, all of that, those lesser emotions, so like driving their behavior. We would be appalled, wouldn't we? So imagine now that if those spirits from Capella coming here, it's almost as what they experienced at first, that shock probably. And if we think about them saying here, we are not a primitive world because of the ability and the intelligence that we already have, the intellectual progress we have already achieved. And they even say our problem is not a problem of intellect or intelligence, a problem moral. We still are lacking in the moral aspect. Loving one another, respecting one another, respecting life, respecting the planet. All those things we're still lacking. We have enough intelligence oftentimes in our own lives to know what's the right path, and sometimes we still don't take it. It's not a matter of a lack of knowledge to some extent. The innate qualities which they, the incarnate spirits, bring with them constitute a proof of their having already lived and achieved a certain degree of progress. But the number of vices to which they are subject also shows their great moral imperfections. So the vices, these lesser emotions, lesser behaviors, less evolved actions that we still take and we see our brothers and sisters taking is proof that there's still much to grow. But the fact is, there are so many incarnated spirits coming here with the intellect to change things for better. If we think about the last 2,000 years, let's think about the last 100, 200 years. How much we progressed technologically, how much we have advanced as a society in that aspect, in the intellectual aspect, in technological aspect. But the moral aspect is still lagging behind. It's much better, but it's still lagging behind. And this is from the Spirit's book. So question 573. In what does the mission of incarnated spirits consist? In instructing men and aiding their advancement, and in ameliorating their institutions by direct material means. Ameliorating by their institutions by direct material means. When I read this, I was thinking material means. That's interesting because these spirits, there are probably spirits way more evolved that are here, but when they come with their mission, if we think of all those great spirits, great humans that have already walked on earth here, we think about their moral and spiritual advancement is great, but the thing is, we are still very much a material world. So they help us also by these direct material means, by coming here as missionaries, as spirits to help advance our progress. These spirits expelled from earth will atone, because then there's another question people ask, okay, what happens then when earth progresses and those who didn't progress, what do they do then? What happens to them? They say here in the book that they will atone for the hardening of their hearts in inferior worlds, where they will find beings in worse condition and will be responsible for making them progress, transmitting to them the product of the knowledge they have already acquired. So they come with that responsibility of helping those beings that are still suffering or still progressing through the knowledge that they have already acquired. And even we're talking about Spiritist review in the beginning here, even in the edition from January 1862, in the Spiritist review, they talk about this spirits atoning in these barbaric environments. And the more developed, I thought this was very interesting, the more developed they are intellectually, the more they're going to suffer in those environments. Meaning the more they had advanced, the more they know, the more they're going to suffer by seeing the atrocities. The same way, if I use the tribe of cannibals that I said, we can think about the more intellectually and the more advanced we are, the more we know that that's wrong. And the more we're going to be appalled by that. The earth, in the words of the spirits, will not have to be transformed through a great destruction that would suddenly annihilate an entire generation. The current generation would gradually disappear, and a new generation will come after. And I underline and bolded gradually there, for us to have this in mind. It is a gradual process. Nature doesn't have leaps. Doesn't do leaps. So what happens is this generation of these spirits is gradually being substituted, and then a new one is coming in, and we're going to continue to have this progress, but it's a gradual progress. And this is in the Gospel according to Spiritism. This spirit who identified him or herself as Mormonde said that while even a drop of blood drawn by the hands of man flows upon the earth, the true kingdom of God, wherein will reign peace and love, which will banish animosity, discord, and wars forever, will still have not been implanted on this planet. So while there's man killing man, brother killing brother, sister killing sister, the kingdom of God truly will have not been installed or implanted on this planet. So that is just so we have an idea. Now, in the book, on the way to a world of regeneration, there is this interesting passage where they talk about this place called the City of Justice. And I thought this was very fitting to this lecture as we think of the planet, like the planet evolving, because the incarnate spirits, we think of the material aspects and the incarnate aspects, but there's also a lot going on in the spirit background, in the discarnate background. And they talk about the City of Justice. If we think of the spiritual planes, this is one that they go and they see things that we don't see on earth, or we haven't as spirits seen on earth in a long time. So they describe a little bit of this place, this spiritual world, where they say, and it's on her earth here, it says, being located in a swampy region close to a chain of well-known mountains. So again, this is not a physical place, but it's a spiritual place where they say that it's been there since the period of the barbaric invasion. So like hundreds and hundreds of years this was created. And I want to read the passage because it's very compelling what they talk about here and the way they describe the place. Manuel Filomeno de Miranda describes this place. He says, birds with scavenger habits and exaggerated size flew around, cawing threateningly in a dark region where no sunlight penetrated. Misshapen beings, slightly similar to primitive and hairy biotypes, holding sections of woods, roamed the periphery of the exterior, acting as guards or lookouts. Strange and funereal sounds appeared and disappeared in bursts of anticipated thunder, lightning that tore through the darkness and seemed to split the ground shaken by their impact. It was similar to the period of the first hominids. The shadows that remained over the area where it had been projected until recently had a disgusting appearance, and the edges spilled a thick, dark, nauseating liquid. Later, the author is saying, we were informed that these were mental emissions and the ripples were transformed into liquid, the initial process of condensation of each person's mental horrors according to their personal content. So we think of hell, he says this is what hell is, basically. If the description. Because if we think about this plane being here on earth, still attached to our world, where the spirits suffer, and everybody, and they call City of Justice because there's so many executioners, so many spirits. They're still ingrained in the hatred and anger, dominating other spirits there. And they call it the city of justice, when we know it's not justice at all. But the fact is, their descriptions of this is terrible. And what happened is, they even said the physical constitution of the place was very similar to the earth of a few billion years of organization and habitability. So even in our earth, in this, let's call it the background that we don't see, we incarnate spirits don't actually see much. There's so much going on. And what happened on chapter 18, interestingly, is because the planet is evolving, everything in the planet Earth, on planet Earth, is evolving along with the planet. So what they said was this spiritual plane had to be transported to another world, because a world of regeneration does not support this type of atrocity, of this type of hatred, of spiritual immorality. So what happened is they transported this world, and on chapter 18 they talk about how that was done, and how they sort of like planned where they were going to transport it. But can you imagine in the background what's happening? Even like these spiritual planes are being transported to other places, and we have no awareness of that. But that just goes to show how our world is changing. And Chico said this. He said, the third millennium promises us wonders, but if man, the son and heir of God, proves himself worthy of these concessions. Meaning, we'll be here if we prove ourselves worthy in this next chapter. And we are builders of this new world, as we saw in the message at the beginning. And some people even, but when is that going to happen? Is it a date? There's some people who want a date, and Kardec says something that at least I like to think. He says that the prediction of any event for a specific time is a sign of mystification. So Kardec sort of shies away and says, let's be careful with trying to set a specific date, 2009, a specific date. Let's not worry about that. He says, let's worry just about the fact that things are changing, and we're part of that change as well. What about our master, our guide, our mentor, big mentor, Jesus? On the Way to the Light, psychographed by Chico, we have this passage here that says, we must concur that Spiritism's efforts are almost greater than its strength, but the world is not at the disposal of earthly dictators. And I underline almost, because sometimes it feels like we're trying to do good. It's like we're rowing against the current. If we try to rise above our imperfection, it's almost like everybody else is doing, I'm going to do different, and then it's gonna be much harder, because people are still doing things that are very wrong. Jesus is its sole leader in the realm of immortal realities. And now that the world holds so many anguishing expectations, the regions closest to the earth are busy reestablishing truth and peace on the road to a new age. So this is from chapter 24. And Emmanuel, again, this was psychographed in 1938. There is a community of pure spirits chosen by the Supreme Lord of the universe, whose hands hold the guiding reins of the life of all planetary collectivities. Meaning what? There are people, there are spirits that are guiding these planetary collectivities. And which means what? In ours, we have Jesus as our guide. We have Jesus to guide us. Nothing happens without a purpose. And progress is a law of nature. We can stall it to some extent, but it's going to happen. And it's already happening. And the idea here, when they say about these communities, or these collectivities of spirits that hold all this power, they mention that this community, this is chapter 1 of On the Way to the Light, met twice. One was when Earth was still developing itself as a planet billions of years ago, and the second one was to plan for the coming of the Master here, for his teachings of love that permeated through the centuries and millennia. It is still a great challenge to do good in today's tumultuous world. However, those who dedicate themselves to the practice of charity and the exercise of doing good should not be discouraged, because if there are executioners from beyond always willing to carry out heinous crimes, Guardian angels also swarm vigilant and quick in the execution of the legitimate fraternity. Meaning what? If we are on the road to good, if we're trying to do good for others and ourselves, we're going to find support. And it says here, vigilant and quick, meaning what? Those spiritual friends are going to come in our aid. As soon as we're doing the good, they already are in our aid, but they're always going to come to our aid. We're never going to be alone in the exercise of good. The time has come when the forces of evil will be compelled to give up their final strongholds of dominion on earth. For after the darkness, a new dawn shall appear. Consoling light will envelop the entire orb that has been regenerated in the baptism of suffering. Of course, it's tests and atonements. It is suffering. So the baptism of suffering is going to help propel the beings in the world forward. The spiritual human being will be melded with the physical one for the glorious march towards the unlimited. In Spiritism, having taken from the world's material ruins the divine soul of all religions perverted by humans, will connect them with the welcoming embrace of restored Christianity as the consoler. And if we think about the baptism of suffering, again, I will say this again. This was psychographed in 1938. And what happened September 1st, 1939? World War. So Emmanuel was already telling us about this baptism of suffering and the process that our world goes through. And again, he's talking now about the Spiritism, about the role that we play, the role that we have, the responsibility that we have in propelling our planet and ourselves forward. And I want to finish with a passage from Planetary Transition, where it says, as in every battle, difficult moments will arise, requiring balance and strengthening prayer. The fighters will be exposed in the world, misunderstood, challenged for being original in their conduct, for bothering the foolish who, faced with the impossibility of equaling them, will fight them and suffer several occasions of deep and apparent loneliness. However, they will never be lonely. Those workers of the good will never be lonely, because the spiritual solidarity of love will be with them, vitalizing them and encouraging them to continue. Have a blessed week, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.